What happens when the person you trust the most becomes your greatest betrayer? The room was silent, except for the faint hum of a flickering light. Malik Gaines sat at the interrogation table, his head lowered, his hands cuffed. His face showed a mixture of regret and defiance, as if he couldn't decide whether to admit his guilt or keep denying it. This wasn't the first time Malik had found himself in trouble. He'd been arrested before for fights and drugs. But this time was different. This time, the charges were far more serious: assault, rape, and drug possession. As Malik sat there, memories flashed through his mind. The laughter of his parents before the accident, the warm meals his grandmother Dolores used to cook for him, and the love she gave even when he didn't deserve it. How had it all come to this? This is the story of Malik Gaines, a young man whose pain and poor choices led him to betray the one person who had always stood by him. It's a story of love, trust, and betrayal seen through Malik's eyes. Can love survive when it's shattered by unimaginable betrayal? And when trust is broken, is redemption even possible? Malik Gaines' story began in a quiet neighborhood where every house told its own tale of hope and struggle. He was the only child of hard-working parents who did everything to give him a better future. Malik's father worked long hours at a local factory, while his mother juggled part-time jobs and kept their small home running. Despite the challenges, their love for Malik shone in everything they did. As a child, Malik was full of potential. He had a smile that could brighten even the darkest days, and his teachers often praised his curiosity and intelligence. At school, he quickly became known as one of the brightest kids in his grade. He loved math, was good at science, and had a knack for solving problems. On weekends, he would spend hours tinkering with broken gadgets his father brought home, trying to figure out how they worked. His teachers saw his spark and encouraged him to dream big. They'd say, "Malik, you could be an engineer or even an inventor someday." His parents, too, dreamed of a better future for their son, one where he could break free from the struggles that had defined their own lives. But life took a sharp, cruel turn when Malik was just 13. A car accident on a rainy night changed everything. His parents were on their way home from picking up groceries when their car skidded off the road and hit a tree. The news came like a thunderclap, shattering Malik's world. At their funeral, Malik stood motionless, his hands clutching a photograph of his family. The once bright boy now looked lost, his eyes filled with a grief too heavy for a child to bear. After the accident, he moved in with his grandmother, Dolores. She was kind-hearted and deeply religious, known in the community for her strength and wisdom. Dolores tried her best to fill the void left by his parents, but Malik was never the same. He withdrew from the world, the spark in his eyes replaced by a distant sadness. His grades began to slip, and he started hanging out with older boys in the neighborhood. At first, Dolores thought they were just friends, but over time, their influence became clear. One summer evening, she caught him sneaking out of the house with a backpack. When she asked where he was going, he shrugged and mumbled, "Just out." That night, she found cigarette butts in his room, along with a small bag of something she couldn't identify. She confronted him the next morning, but Malik just stared at the floor, avoiding her questions. "I'm fine, Grandma," he said finally, his voice flat and distant. But Dolores knew better. As the years went on, Malik's behavior grew more troubling. He dropped out of school and started spending more time on the streets. The bright boy who once dreamed of becoming an engineer now seemed determined to destroy himself. Dolores prayed for him daily, begging God to bring back the child she had once known. Despite everything, there were moments when glimpses of the old Malik would resurface. Once, on his grandmother's birthday, he surprised her with a handmade card. Inside, he had written, "Thank you for everything, Mama D. I don't say it enough, but I love you." Dolores held on to these moments, believing that the boy she had raised was still in there somewhere. But as the years passed, her hope began to waver. Malik's life was spiraling out of control, and she didn't know how to save him. The boy with so much promise was now a man burdened by pain and bad choices. And though Dolores never stopped loving him, she wondered if her love would ever be enough to bring him back. It was a humid summer evening, and Dolores Gaines sat in her living room. the faint hum of the ceiling fan barely cutting through the oppressive heat. She had been feeling uneasy all day, though she couldn't explain why. Malik had been out since the afternoon, his whereabouts unknown, as was often the case these days. Despite her exhaustion from years of worry, Dolores couldn't help but keep glancing at the clock. The hands ticked closer to midnight when she finally heard the sound of the front door creaking open. Her heart skipped a beat. Malik stumbled inside, his footsteps heavy and uneven. The smell of alcohol and something sharper, possibly drugs, wafted through the air, making Dolores wince. She rose from her chair, her frail frame trembling with equal parts worry and frustration. "Malik," she called softly, her voice tinged with concern. "Where have you been?" Malik didn't answer. Instead, he staggered into the kitchen, muttering incoherently. Dolores followed him, her anxiety growing with each step. She found him rummaging through the refrigerator, his movements erratic. "You're drunk," she said, a hint of anger creeping into her voice. "What's gotten into you, boy?" For a moment, Malik looked at her with a mix of defiance and guilt. Then his expression darkened. "You don't get it, Mama D. You never have," he slurred. Before Dolores could respond, he knocked over a glass from the counter, the sound of shattering filling the small kitchen. She recoiled, slightly startled. Malik's temper had grown unpredictable in recent years, and she knew better than to provoke him further. "Let's talk in the morning, Malik," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "You need to rest?" But Malik didn't go to his room. Instead, he slumped into a chair at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. For a moment, Dolores thought he might finally open up to her. She approached him cautiously, her hand reaching out to rest on his shoulder. "Please, Malik," she whispered. "Talk to me." What happened next would forever be etched into her memory. In an instant, Malik's demeanor shifted from weary to volatile. He lashed out, pushing her hand away and standing abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Dolores stepped back, fear coursing through her. "I'm not some charity case," he shouted. "You think you can save me? You can't even save yourself." The words cut deep, but it wasn't the worst of it. Malik's anger spiraled into something darker. The next moments unfolded in a blur of rage, violence, and betrayal. Dolores's cries for him to stop fell on deaf ears. By the time it was over, she lay on the cold kitchen floor, her body trembling and her spirit shattered. Malik stood over her, his chest heaving as if the weight of his actions had just hit him. His face contorted with a mix of anger and regret. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. But the apology felt hollow, lost in the wake of what he had done. Dolores, broken and battered, struggled to her feet. Her mind raced, filled with questions and disbelief. How had it come to this? How had the boy she had raised, the boy she had loved, turned into someone capable of such a monstrous act? Her trembling hands found the phone. She hesitated for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Calling the police meant betraying her grandson, but staying silent meant condoning his actions. With tears streaming down her face, she dialed 911. When the police arrived, Malik didn't resist. He stood motionless, as if he had been expecting this all along. As they placed him in handcuffs, he turned to Dolores, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Mama D," he said, his voice cracking. Dolores didn't reply. She watched as they led him away, her heart breaking into pieces. The silence in the house that night was deafening, filled only by the echoes of everything that had been lost. It was the night everything changed, the night love and trust were shattered, leaving only questions, pain, and a fractured family behind. The drive to the station was eerily silent. Malik sat in the back of the police car, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on him like a heavy stone. He stared out of the window, the streetlights casting fleeting shadows on his face. His mind raced, replaying the events of the night. He couldn't bring himself to fully grasp what he had done. At the station, the officers led him into an interrogation room. The stark white walls and harsh fluorescent lights made the room feel cold and unwelcoming. Malik was no stranger to being in trouble, but this time it was different. This wasn't about drugs or some petty theft. This was something far more serious, something he could never undo. He sat at the table, his eyes glued to the floor. He didn't protest. He didn't try to justify himself. The shame was too overwhelming. The officers laid out the charges: assault, rape, and drug possession. The words hit him like a freight train, each one heavier than the last. He couldn't look up, couldn't meet their eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I wasn't thinking straight." The officer across from him didn't flinch. "You weren't thinking straight because you were drunk and high, Malik. That doesn't change what you did." Malik had no answer. He buried his face in his hands, trying to block out the world. But the memories kept coming back: the anger, Dolores's fear, her trembling hands as she picked up the phone to call 911. Back at home, Dolores sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone she had used to dial for help. The house was quiet, but not in the comforting way it used to be. This silence was suffocating, filled with the echoes of the night's events. She couldn't stop her hands from shaking. The bruises on her arms ached, but the pain in her heart was far worse. She had done what she thought was right, but the guilt was unbearable. She had called the police on her grandson, the boy she had raised, loved, and fought for. "God, give me strength," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Help me understand why this had to happen." Her prayer was met with silence. But she continued to pray, clinging to her faith like a lifeline. The next day, Dolores visited the police station. She had to see Malik, even though every part of her heart screamed against it. When they brought him into the visitation room, Dolores barely recognized him. His shoulders slumped, his face pale, his eyes red from crying. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Dolores stared at the boy she had raised, searching for the child she once knew. Malik avoided her gaze, his hands fidgeting on the table. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why, Malik?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why did you do this?" His head shot up, tears brimming in his eyes. "I don't know, Mama D. I wasn't thinking. I was angry, drunk. I'm sorry. Sorry," Dolores said, her voice rising with a mixture of pain and anger. "Do you even understand what you've done? You've destroyed everything. Everything." Malik flinched at her words, but he didn't defend himself. "I know," he whispered. "I know I messed up. I don't deserve your forgiveness." Dolores sat back, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion. She wanted to scream, to cry, to make him understand the depth of her pain. But all she could do was shake her head. "I loved you," she said quietly. "I gave you everything I had left. And this is how you repay me." Malik's tears fell freely now. "I'm sorry," he repeated, his voice cracking. "I don't know how to make it right." "You can't," Dolores said, standing up. "Only God can help you now. I've done all I can." She turned and walked out, leaving Malik alone with his guilt. That night, as Malik sat alone in his holding cell, Dolores's words echoed in his mind. He replayed her face, the disappointment, the heartbreak, the pain he had caused. For the first time in years, Malik prayed. It was a messy, broken prayer filled with guilt and desperation. "God, if you're listening, I don't even know if I deserve your forgiveness. But if there's any way to fix this, any way to make it right, please help me." The cell grew quiet again, but something in Malik shifted. The weight of his actions didn't disappear, but he felt the faintest flicker of hope, a small, fragile thing, but enough to hold on to. The road ahead would be long and uncertain. But for the first time, Malik began to face the reality of who he had become and who he might still have the chance to be. 3 months later, the day of the trial arrived and the small town buzzed with anticipation. This wasn't just a trial. It was a spectacle, a public reckoning that drew people from every corner of the community. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, with some standing along the back wall. Malik entered the room in handcuffs, escorted by 2 officers. His orange prison uniform was a stark contrast to the boy Dolores had once dressed in Sunday suits for church. He avoided eye contact with the crowd, his head bowed under the weight of shame. Dolores sat quietly in the gallery, her face a mask of exhaustion and sorrow. She wore a plain black dress, a symbol of her mourning, not just for the grandson she had lost to his crimes, but for the life she could never reclaim. The prosecutor wasted no time painting Malik as a dangerous man whose actions stemmed from years of poor choices and unchecked anger. This case, the prosecutor began addressing the jury, is not just about a violent crime. It's about betrayal, about a man who violated the trust of the one person who loved him unconditionally. The prosecution called on neighbors and community members who testified about Malik's reckless lifestyle. They described loud parties, frequent fights, and the growing tension in Dolores's household. Medical experts took the stand, detailing Dolores's injuries in stark, clinical terms. They also confirmed the devastating truth: Dolores's HIV diagnosis was a direct result of the assault. The evidence was overwhelming. Photos of the scene, the medical reports, and even Malik's own confessions painted a damning picture. The jury's expressions shifted as each piece of evidence was presented. Some looked horrified, others angry, and a few even looked like they were on the verge of tears. When Dolores took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Her frail hands trembled as she gripped the edges of the witness stand, her voice soft but steady. She recounted her efforts to raise Malik after the tragic loss of his parents, detailing the sacrifices she had made and the love she had poured into him. "I did everything I could," she said, her voice breaking. "I tried to give him a life, even when mine was falling apart. And I never thought he could do something like this." Her words hung in the air like a weight. The jury watched her with a mix of pity and respect. Dolores's tears fell freely as she described the events of that fateful night, the fear, the pain, and the betrayal that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "I loved him," she said finally, looking directly at Malik for the first time since the arrest. "But love doesn't excuse what he's done." Malik, sitting at the defense table, couldn't meet her gaze. The defense attorney worked hard to shift the narrative. They painted Malik as a victim of his circumstances, a young man who had suffered unimaginable trauma after losing his parents. "Malik Gaines is not a monster," the defense attorney said. "He's a young man who made terrible choices, yes. But those choices were born out of pain, loss, and a lack of guidance." Former teachers and childhood friends were called to the stand. They spoke of a boy who once had promise, a boy who loved basketball and dreamed of becoming a pilot. They blamed his downward spiral on the accident that claimed his parents, saying it left him adrift in a world of anger and grief. But the defense's argument was weak compared to the mountain of evidence against Malik. The jury struggled to reconcile the image of a sweet, innocent boy with the man who had committed such a heinous act. After weeks of testimony, the trial came to a close. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with their decision. "Malik Gaines," the foreperson announced, "we find you guilty on all charges." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, but Malik remained still, his face unreadable. The judge delivered the sentence: 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15. "Your actions," the judge said firmly, "have caused irreparable harm to someone who loved and trusted you. While this court acknowledges your difficult past, it does not excuse the severity of your crimes." Dolores sat in the gallery, silent tears streaming down her face. She had hoped for justice, but as the verdict was read, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a hollow conclusion to a chapter filled with heartbreak. The town was divided. Some saw the trial as a necessary step toward justice, while others sympathized with Malik, blaming his upbringing and circumstances. Dolores became the subject of hushed whispers and judgmental glances. Some pitied her, others blamed her for not addressing Malik's behavior earlier. For Dolores, the verdict marked the end of one battle, but the beginning of another. She had to rebuild her life, piece by piece, while grappling with the loss of her grandson, not to death, but to his own destructive choices. And for Malik, the trial was the beginning of a long journey through the prison system, a place where he would be forced to confront his actions and the pain he had caused. Malik Gaines was transferred to a state prison shortly after his sentencing. As the heavy gates slammed shut behind him, the reality of his new life hit him like a ton of bricks. Gone were the nights of reckless freedom, the chaotic parties, and the numbing escape of drugs and alcohol. Now he faced the stark monotony of prison life, rows of cold metal bunks, harsh fluorescent lighting, and the constant noise of other inmates. The first few weeks were the hardest. Malik kept to himself, navigating the delicate balance of prison politics, where alliances and rivalries could form in an instant. Meals were bland, the days were long, and the nights were restless. In the silence of his cell, he was left alone with his thoughts, a punishment in itself. Each night, Malik replayed the events that led him to this point. The image of Dolores sitting in the courtroom, her tears flowing freely as she recounted the pain he caused, haunted him. Her trembling voice echoed in his mind. I loved him. But love doesn't excuse what he's done. Her face, lined with years of sacrifice and sorrow, reminded him of everything he had destroyed. He had not only hurt her physically, but had betrayed the woman who had given him a second chance at life after his parents' tragic death. In his quieter moments, Malik began to understand the depth of his crimes. It wasn't just about that single night. It was about the years of choices, each one a step further down a dark path that led him to betray the one person who had always been in his corner. Prison offered Malik little in terms of comfort, but plenty of opportunities for reflection. He joined a mandated therapy program, initially out of obligation rather than genuine interest. Sitting in a circle with other inmates, he listened to their stories of trauma, anger, and regret. Slowly, he realized that his story wasn't unique. During one session, a counselor asked a question that stayed with him. Asterisk, what would you say to the person you hurt most if you could face them right now? Malik had no answer. What could he say to Dolores that she hadn't already heard? He began journaling as part of his therapy, pouring his thoughts onto paper. At first, the words came slowly, disjointed apologies and self-pity. But over time, his entries became more introspective. He wrote about his parents' death, his spiraling anger, and his misguided belief that numbing his pain would make it disappear. One day, while working in the prison library, Malik stumbled upon a Bible. He had seen it before, but had never been interested. This time, he opened it and began to read. The stories of forgiveness, redemption, and second chances resonated deeply with him. Malik started attending chapel services, finding solace in the words of the prison chaplain. The messages of accountability and grace struck a chord. He began to pray, at first awkwardly, unsure of what to say. But gradually, it became a daily ritual, a way to confront his past and seek a semblance of peace. In one prayer, he whispered, God, if I can't make it right with her, let me at least become someone she wouldn't be ashamed of. Prison wasn't all reflection and redemption. Malik faced the harsh realities of the environment, violence, intimidation, and isolation. He learned to defend himself when necessary, but also to avoid unnecessary conflicts. He took up a prison job in the laundry room, a monotonous task that allowed him time to think. With time, he began participating in educational programs, earning his GED, and enrolling in anger management classes. The structure gave him a sense of purpose, even as he struggled to forgive himself. 2 years into his sentence, Malik decided to write to Dolores. It took him months to gather the courage. The first letter was simple. Mama D, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm sorry for everything I've done. I hope you're doing okay. Dolores never responded, but Malik kept writing. Each letter was a piece of his heart laid bare. He told her about his therapy sessions, the Bible passages that comforted him, and his efforts to change. Despite his efforts, the question lingered. Could redemption ever erase the damage he had done? Malik wasn't sure. The memories of that night, of Dolores's broken trust and pain, were scars he carried every day. Prison had stripped him of everything, his freedom, his reputation, his family. But it had also given him something unexpected. The chance to confront himself. Whether Dolores would ever forgive him, he didn't know. But he hoped that in time, he could become a man worthy of her forgiveness, even if he never received it. Malik stared out of his cell window one night, the stars barely visible through the bars. He whispered a quiet prayer. Help me be better. Whether it would be enough, only time could tell. For Dolores Gaines, life after Malik's sentencing was far from peaceful. The house, once filled with laughter and family memories, now echoed with silence. The pain of betrayal lingered, a constant weight that dulled her days and haunted her nights. Each room held a memory of Malik, the boy she had loved and raised as her own. His childhood drawings still adorned the fridge, and his old sneakers sat by the front door untouched since the day the police took him away. But those memories, once a source of joy, now brought nothing but sorrow. Dolores withdrew from the world. She stopped attending church, unable to face the sympathetic glances and hushed whispers of her congregation. Trips to the grocery store became infrequent as she dreaded running into neighbors who might offer their pity, or worse, their judgment. The betrayal felt like a wound that refused to heal. She had given everything to Malik, raising him after his parents' tragic deaths. She worked tirelessly to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. She had sacrificed her own happiness to give him a chance at a better life. Yet, despite it all, he had hurt her in the most unimaginable way. Her physical injuries from the assault healed with time, but the emotional scars ran deep. She wrestled with feelings of shame, guilt, and anger. Had she failed him as a guardian? Could she have done more to steer him away from the path that led to this? Dolores's faith had always been her guiding light. She prayed every day, seeking solace in the words of Scripture. But forgiveness, so often preached in the Bible, felt impossible. How do you forgive someone who has broken your trust so completely? She often asked herself. She wanted to let go of the bitterness, but every time she closed her eyes, the memories of that night resurfaced. Her pastor visited her one afternoon, urging her to find peace through forgiveness. "It's not about excusing his actions," he said gently. "It's about freeing yourself from the chains of anger and pain." Dolores listened, but her heart was heavy. Forgiveness felt like a betrayal of her own pain, a dismissal of the suffering Malik had caused her. Time didn't heal Dolores's wounds, it merely dulled them. She tried to find new routines to fill the void. She took up gardening, planting flowers in her backyard as a way to reconnect with the world outside her home. The vibrant colors brought a small measure of joy, though the emptiness lingered. She also volunteered at a local shelter helping young people who had lost their way. In each troubled face, she saw a glimpse of Malik. The boy he once was, full of promise and potential. Her work became a way to honor the love she still held for him, even as she struggled to reconcile it with her pain. Malik's letters began arriving 2 years after his incarceration. The envelopes, neatly addressed in his handwriting, piled up on her kitchen table. She couldn't bring herself to read them. Each letter felt like a reminder of the life they had both lost. But she couldn't throw them away either. Some nights, she sat at the table, her fingers tracing the edges of the envelopes, wondering what words lay inside. Was he apologizing? Was he blaming her? Did he miss her? The questions plagued her, but the answers remained sealed. Dolores's health began to decline as the years went by. The emotional toll of the assault and its aftermath had left her weary. She was diagnosed with depression, and her once vibrant spirit seemed to fade. Despite her struggles, she clung to her faith. She prayed for strength, for healing, and for guidance. She prayed for Malik, too, hoping that he would find redemption and peace, even if she never could. Dolores's enduring pain was a testament to the depth of her love and the magnitude of Malik's betrayal. She had once believed that love could conquer anything, but now she knew that some wounds run too deep for even love to heal. Her story became a somber reminder of the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences of choices left unchecked. And yet, amidst the pain, she found small moments of resilience. Proof that even in the darkest times, the human spirit could endure. Malik Gaines's journey is one of tragedy, choices, and consequences, but it also raises profound questions. Can a person who has caused irreparable harm ever truly find redemption? And for the victim, is healing possible when the scars run so deep? In the years since his imprisonment, Malik has undergone significant change. Therapy and reflection forced him to confront the demons of his past. He embraced religion, spending hours in his prison cell reading the Bible and writing letters of apology to Dolores. These letters, filled with remorse and promises to do better, were his way of seeking forgiveness, though they often went unopened. But is regret enough to undo the damage caused by his actions? Malik's remorse seemed genuine, yet it could not restore the life he had shattered. Redemption, in his case, became a solitary pursuit, a quiet reckoning with his own guilt, and the hope that one day he might leave the world a better person than he found it. For Dolores, the question of forgiveness remained unanswered. Her enduring pain, coupled with her faith, kept her torn between two paths, holding on to the anger that consumed her or finding a way to let it go. She had lost her grandson in every sense of the word, and the void he left behind could never truly be filled. Malik and Dolores' story is a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how trauma, unchecked emotions, and poor choices can destroy lives. It's also a call to action for families, communities, and individuals to seek help before things spiral out of control. This case leaves us with haunting questions. Can redemption ever outweigh the harm caused by one's actions? Should forgiveness be granted, even when the betrayal is as deep as this? We'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in Dolores' position? Can someone like Malik ever truly make amends? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this story thought-provoking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to light. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Let's keep the conversation going and shed light on the complexities of crime, justice, and human resilience.